Welcome, everyone. We are really excited. Today is our official launch of our latest magazine, which is honoring 15 emerging scholars. And I should say that we received hundreds of nominations last year, and we went through the process of picking our top 15 emerging scholars across the nation, across disciplines. And we're here today for the first time. We've never done this before. We just put out the magazine, but for the first time, we've decided to actually engage with the scholars so that you can learn a little bit about them. And of course, we also urge you all to get a copy of your magazine and read about them and about the work that they're doing, which is really transforming our nation and our world. So I just kind of want to go around, if it's okay, and just ask that our colleagues quickly introduce themselves. We're again very excited to have them here, and then we'll talk a little bit about their research. So I'm going to start with across my screen, Dr. Bermicki.
Sure. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what part of the country you're in. My name is Jorge Bermicki. My pronouns are he, him, his, él. I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Very broadly, my research looks like equity-driven leadership, particularly community colleges, minority-serving institutions, and broad access institutions. And I can talk a whole lot, but I think you want us to keep it brief, right?
Yeah, and then we'll come back around for sure, but just wanted to do the
Awesome.
introduction. So again, welcome. Glad you're here. HBCU in the house. Dr. Mark.
Hello, everyone. My name is Skip Mark. I'm the director of the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies at the University of Rhode Island and an assistant professor of political science. I study human rights, how to identify violations and measure them, the causes and consequences, and the way they apply to particular groups and interact with economic decisions.
Welcome so much. Glad that you're here. Dr. Mendoza.
Hi, everyone. My name is Albie Mendoza, and I am from an HBCU, Delaware State University in Dover, Delaware. And I love to teach my students, and I actually ended my class early today. And they were so sad about that. But welcome, and I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Indum.
Hi, everyone. I'm Delia Endum. I'm an assistant professor of architecture also at Howard University in Washington, D.C. My work looks at housing, design equity issues specific to architectures of the African diaspora. Happy to be here.
Another Howard faculty member as well. Dr. Trevino.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melva Trevino, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Rhode Island in the Sustainable Food Systems program, the Fisheries Department. I'm a coastal human geographer and an ethnographer, and my research focuses on understanding access and unequal power dynamics in coastal settings. I'm really interested in documenting how people navigate environmental change and how, like what types of resources they can access to navigate that. And I've worked in Rhode Island and Ecuador, and soon I'll be working in Micronesia this summer. So I'm really excited about that.
Excellent. Welcome. Rhode Island represented in the house. Dr. Mays.
Hi, everyone. It is morning in Arizona, so I will say good morning. I'm Renee Mays. I'm an associate professor at the University of Arizona, and I am just delighted to be here among such wonderful, bright, brilliant, and talented scholars. So thank you, Jamal or Dr. Watson, for putting this on.
No, thank you for joining us. And Dr. Stewart.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is TJ Stewart. He and him are my pronouns. I am joining you from Central Iowa, the traditional ancestral homelands of the Iowa, Meskwaki, and Sauk nations. I'm an assistant professor at Iowa State University. My home department is Higher Education and Student Affairs. I'm also a faculty affiliate with Women and Gender Studies. And my research broadly looks at people, populations, and ideas that are in the margins of the margins. So groups that are hyper-marginalized or hyper-stigmatized, particularly in post-secondary environments. So I study college students engaged in sex work, fat phobia, and sizeism in post-secondary environments, as well as anti-Blackness and non-Black communities of color. So really looking at like diversity 2.0 is what my research is focused on.
Well, thank you so much. Good to have you here. Professor Alexander.
Good morning from Los Angeles. I'm Taifa Alexander. I'm the CRT4 Project Director at UCLA School of Law. We're alongside a team of faculty, staff, and student researchers. I am responsible for leading the institutional response to the attacks on critical race theory. I'm also appointed as a lecturer of law at USC Gould School of Law, where I teach courses on race, enslavement, and law. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Leva.
Hi, everybody. Congratulations to all the fellow scholars and everybody. Hello, what's out in Zoom land. I'm an associate professor of mathematics education and STEM higher education, Luis Leva, he, L pronouns. I'm also the director of the Power, Resistance, and Identity in STEM Education Research Lab at Vanderbilt University and Peabody College. And my work examines how teaching and learning, classroom teaching and learning, and campus support structures in higher education can be designed in ways that can be more identity affirming for undergraduate students who are historically marginalized in relation to race, gender, and sexual identities. Pleasure to be here and much gratitude.
Thank you so much. And finally, Dr. Glora.
Hello, everyone from Arizona. I'm Alexandrina Agloro. I'm assistant professor at the School for the Future of Innovation and Society at Arizona State University. I'm a interactive media maker, community-based researcher, and a futurist, and I dream alongside communities about how technology is part of our collective liberation and future.
Great, great. Well, welcome again to all of you. For the audience, if you have some questions for our scholars, certainly we'll try to get to as many as we can, but we want to keep this really conversational. So I guess I'm just curious, and any of you can answer, sort of what does this mean to be an emerging scholar named by diverse issues of higher education? What does this mean for you? And any of you can just jump in and answer. If not, I'll call on you.
I
We'll
can
start.
chime in. I was gonna say if you can call people, but I can chime in too.
Go ahead.
I was, something that was really meaningful was just, particularly in an era where so much research revolving around equity and inclusion is under attack. Versus embracing this, and I think that many of us are, doing research with a little bit of fear, but also just feeling empowered that this work is more needed than ever before, and just being recognized by diverse, saying, no, we see you, this is important, and you don't need to shy away. In fact, we're going to celebrate you, was really meaningful. And I think particularly this year, particularly in a presidential election year, where we know what's at stake, I think it's all the more meaningful. So I think this is a really, really special year as well to be recognized for this.
Great. Others?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I echo those sentiments. I think, a lot of my work focuses on the Caribbean and the architectures of the Caribbean, which historically have not been given a lot of attention in architecture academia. It's been delivered through a Eurocentric lens. That was my education. It was very much about the kind of European architects. And so I think, having this emergent scholar recognition, I think also, in addition to issues of diversity, equity, as Dr. Bemeke said, just, highlighting the work that we're all doing, the work that hasn't been given a lot of attention is, that much more important.
Yeah.
I also appreciate how there's diversity in our group of scholars, and I'm a teaching focused institution. So Delaware State University is an HBCU, and we have a lot of research focused faculty, but I'm one of the teaching focused faculty. So I also really just kind of appreciate that the teaching realm, teaching of psychology specifically, but teachers in general getting that recognition and not necessarily just focus on research. So I appreciate that.
Yes. Dr. Trevino.
Yeah, I think along to what Dr. Mendoza said is I was the work I'm as a human geographer working in coastal settings, like I've had to actively think of ways to bring equity and inclusion into my research, and it's been like something that I've intentionally grown in and doing, but I was not recognized for this because of my research, and I think that that's something that makes me really proud that I was recognized for the service that I do. And that's something that is so severely undervalued in academia. And it's something that it's like, I pour so much of myself into that. And I even get emotional about it because it's been something that has sustained me in academia, the service work that I do. So to be able to be recognized, I know the colleagues who nominated see me, they see this work as and the value that it brings, but to then be also be recognized on this level for the work that I do, it's just really validating. And you know, it's something that it's not very much service, just like teaching, like Dr. Mendoza said, are not often as valued. But for some of us, it's really important work. And the work that we're doing is what allows other students and people who come after us to be here. So to me, I feel very grateful to be validated, but also to be recognized for work that I know is important. But then to hear that you all thought was important too is obviously very validating. So thank you.
I agree. I feel like the mantra of my graduate school years for my mentors and now to what I tell my own mentees is that you can't be what you can't see. And so having us all on the front of this, doing the work that we're doing means that there's space in human geography and in all these places where I do a lot of public scholarship, and that's what I have not shied away from, and it matters to me. Communities matter to me. And I'm out here in my like technological fantasy wing over here and loving it and happy about it. And I am, it's so fulfilling to be recognized that these future things and our future studies like matter for recognition and matter to get more brown, Black, Indigenous people like in this space with me here.
Yeah, no, well said. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone else said and just say, you know, academia continues to have a huge diversity issue. But looking at all of the work that everyone here has done, I think it highlights how much we contribute to academia and how much better academia could be, right? If all of the diverse scholars who are doing amazing work were represented. And so I'm really appreciative that I'm getting to interact with all of you and that you're highlighting some of this work.
Absolutely. Anyone else before I move on? So one of the things that I thought was fascinating as I was reading all of your profiles, and I had a chance to read them all, written by our writers, is the ways in which so many of you are engaged in taking your research and making it more accessible to individuals outside of the academy. And I think that's really important. It's certainly a contribution to our society in general. And I was wondering if any of you who are engaged in that kind of work could talk a little bit about it. We heard a little bit from Dr. Aglora about how she's kind of approaching this, but anyone else who want to talk about the need for, again, taking this research and kind of making it more accessible in the public space?
I'm happy to jump in really briefly. I think for me, it's really been the true sort of benefit and joy of the work is having it try to reach people that matter and make it legible for the people and groups that it's about. I mean, for me, this is full circle. My first op-ed was published in Diverse as a graduate student. And so I think publishing open access in an avenue that I read as a practitioner. So before I became a scholar, started my doctoral work, I was in a multicultural center, subscribing to the magazine and reading about what's going on. But I think in my own work, it's been really important to not just do community engaged work, but to do community accountable work. And so, you know, I work alongside college students who are engaged in various forms of erotic labor. And one of the things that we did is we talked about where they wanted their stories to go, who they wanted to hear them, and how they wanted to hear them. And as we know in academia, traditionally, when you get your data, it's like, thanks, peace out, like, and then I get to go and decide what to do with it. And that didn't feel good to me. And so when I sat down with the students that were working with me on this study, I don't use the language of participant, I use the languages of collaborator. And I gave them all the options. And they were like, we want a book, which was frightening to me as a pre-tenured faculty member, not in like history or humanities where that might be normal. And so I'm like, well, gee, how am I going to write a book? And I'm supposed to be writing articles. But I figured out a way to write that book, and I figured out a way to make it open access because that's what they asked for. That's what they mandated. And so for me, I think that, you know, people have been generating knowledge and theorizing in the streets, in the hoods, in the barrios for generations, long before the academy. And so I think it's pretty problematic to just assume that that's only happening here or that it only needs to stay here. And so I've really tried to do that, to try to figure out how do I get it to folks. And so for me, that looked like working collaboratively with the folks who my work is about, asking them where they wanted it to go, and then trying to make sure so the ebook that I wrote is open access so that anyone who wants it can have it for free. And so I think the more we can get into trying to make what we do accessible and legible, I think the more we're able to have sort of this broader impact that I think we're having in the world and in the country specifically.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Anyone else?
I want to bring some of the scholars who aren't here into the space. I don't know if you know this, Dr. Watson, but Nick John Ramos and Laura Quito Lopez and I all went to graduate school together at USC at the same time.
Wow,
So-
isn't that something? We didn't know that.
We're homies.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know any of them. I just looked at the profiles right now. I was like, hey, those are my people.
Small
And
world.
I
Wow.
think that also might be representative of the way that we were trained. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. George Sanchez, who wanted to solidify with us that we are scholars and we can be activists, but community organizers and activists do a specific particular thing. And we as scholars are trained to do a specific particular thing. So don't shy away from that seat at the table, because we have to take that seat at the table. And that's what he always told us, was that we take that seat at the table as scholars to do the work that we're meant to do, because the scholarship and the research and the outreach that we do is what policymakers, is what community organizers, is what the activists will call upon to support why we need the kinds of change that we need. And so that has always been the most resounding thing, that it's that we are not doing things above and beyond or on the outskirts of what academic work is. Like, we are doing exactly what we are trained to do, to be here for. And like, I see this all in the work that all of us scholars are doing. But to be anchored in our scholarship and to feel supported and verified that we as scholars are making the change in the particular vein that we're doing.
That's great. I see Professor Alexander's hands up.
Right. I just wanted to lift up a couple of the points that were already shared and just to highlight some in my own work, and just saying that academia for a long time has been this gatekeeper, so to speak, of who is a knowledge producer and who isn't. And one of the things that's important in my work is recognizing that people, to quote Dr. Stewart, from the barrio, from the hood, from, where I'm from, are equal knowledge producers in the work that it is that I am producing, and to ensure that it's accessible to folks who may only be able to read on an 8th grade level is something that I prioritize, and being able to disseminate the data and information about the attacks on critical race theory that I have been. Another personal point for me is that my mom immigrated to this country with nothing more than $5 in her pocket and an 8th grade reading level. And my sisters and I joke that somehow she has an MBA, 2 JDs, and an LLM, because that's what we have. And without her, we wouldn't have been able to achieve those things. And so I honor her by being able to ensure that she herself would have been able to read the research and data that we collect. And I think that it's important to do that work as resisting the gatekeeping that exists inherently in academia.
Wow. Very, very powerful. Anyone else?
I'll add on to that. That was beautiful. It's you just have me thinking and reflecting on the fact that our communities made us. And so I might have some letters behind my name, and yes, that comes with expertise, but I'm still that person that is embedded in the community. And if it's not great for the community, I don't want to do it. Right? Like, that is the purpose of why I'm here. It's why I have a seat at the table. Either I'm a co-conspirator or I'm out, and I know my lane and I know my purpose. And the goal is always to work towards liberation and to work in defense of Black joy, especially that among youth. And the people who need to know that are the people who are going, for me, the people who are going into education, right? The people who are going into those settings where they are serving our Black youth, they need to know that, but also they need to understand that Black youth, Black children already know. They already know what they need. They already know how strong they are, and they need people to see them fully. And so the way that we have those conversations, it's not just something that happens in the ivory tower. It is something that happens with and among Black youth, right? And that we are invited to their table to break bread and to understand and to learn and to listen from them. So often I find that, yes, I might have a seat at the table and be able to share their words, but it's so much better if you come to their table
Yeah.
and hear their words, because they don't need me to speak on their behalf. You just need to be quiet and listen.
Mm.
And how can I, as a scholar, keep doing that? Right. And that might mean, hey, so right now, Lauren Mims, who's also an emerging scholar and is away, we have a grant right now focused on Black youth mental health. And so who are the experts in the community who've been knowing that we just need to amplify what they're doing? How can we do more of that? Because they don't need me coming in and telling them what to do. Oh, heavens no. Our communities are brilliant and smart. They don't need me to tell them what to do. They just need a platform. And I'm glad to give a platform, right? I'm glad to use whatever resources, university money, grant money, whatever I have to amplify their voices so that we can get the support and the things that we need in the communities and to build more partnerships. And it has to be a public, a public scholarship component, a public facing connection and reality.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that was so fascinating, kind of reading all of the nominations, was to think about the ways in which mentoring and even sponsorship was so key for the nominators. And I know that in reading your stories, mentorship and sponsorship is important for all of you as well. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which you're kind of showing up for your students as they're kind of navigating their way through this space that is sometimes very harsh, not always friendly, right? And that is not always receptive to people of color. So anybody want to chime in on that mentorship, sponsorship piece, which I think is important?
I can jump in here. So I think for me, one of the main things is our research lab for PRISM, where in terms of the diversity that we have here today, in terms of social diversity, but also intellectual diversity, like many of us are doing justice-oriented work, and we can't rely on the dominant perspectives in our own fields. We have to look beyond our own fields to be able to really transform knowledge. And in our own research lab, the way that we do this is that we unapologetically have strong intersectional diversity in terms on the social aspect, but also even though it's housed in an education college, we're an interdisciplinary crew, right? So we really bring in sociological perspectives, we bring in Latin study perspectives to be able to engage in this work, because those are the ways that we're able to kind of change the ways that we have dominant conceptions of what it means to do equity or justice-oriented work in STEM education. And so with that, being able to translate that into mentorship. So how do we kind of leverage each other's respective disciplinary strengths and wherever we're coming from? So if, let's say, for example, one of our lab members is well-versed in trauma-informed ways of interviewing, that could be really translational in terms of interviewing students who are coming from historically marginalized community where STEM has been a form of racialized trauma for them, right? So how do we begin to recognize that oftentimes we really kind of need to leverage those interdisciplinary strengths to our advantage as a collective crew in our research lab? And so as the director of the lab, I try to really decenter myself and recenter all of the wealth of knowledge that we have to be able to then also say, you know what, there are some kind of dominant perspectives of the peer review process, what is considered rigorous research in the academy, where we still kind of see those metrics for what they are, but we do it in our own terms.
Yeah. Dr. Mendoza?
Yes, I wanted to also highlight that, in academia, we are doing work in our own departments, but I also feel like when we mentor our students, we want to make it a team effort. So one of the ways that I tell my students that, if you, especially my first generation college students, if they don't know something, they need to ask, but it's hard to ask, especially because they don't want to look like they don't know something that they should. But I encourage that in my classroom, and I tell them my own personal story. I was the first in my family to go to US college. My parents had their degrees in the Philippines, but we didn't know what a FAFSA was. We didn't know what a bursar was. We didn't know what a registrar was. And so even just going to different departments is a maze, right? So I make sure that I have maps for them. I make sure to give them websites. And I also just wanted to highlight that it's a group effort. So we have resources at my university for first generation students. We have resources for tutoring services. There's a Center for Teaching and Learning that helps faculty who want to have more inclusive practices. So I think when we model the behaviors that we want our students to get from not only our teaching, but also our service and our scholarship, and the way that we interact with people, and the way that we have relationships with other departments, I think they're going to see that higher education is a great place to be, especially in this era where it's post-pandemic. There's I teach in-person classes, everyone, and so getting them into the classroom and not just in the virtual space is very, very challenging. And so what does it mean to be in the classroom with other people and interact and post-COVID? And I think part of that has to be that diversity, equity, inclusion, that safe space and the brave space for our students.
Yeah, I want to go to Dr. Indum, and then Dr. Mark, and then Dr. Trevino.
Yes, I echo the sentiments about, this idea of interdisciplinary work. With our students, we try to show them the power of design to drive change, but the power of design and architecture to also inflict harm. So we try to show our students, like, design is inherently political. Like, a wall can divide, a wall can segregate, a wall can, how it's designed, affect one's mental health when they're in that space. So a lot of what I try to do with our students is thinking about design activism and thinking about all of these intersectional issues at play that we need to understand when we're thinking about design. So social, geographic, cultural, mental health, public health issues, and the list goes on. And so the idea being that they understand as they go out into the world as architects, that they can begin to understand their place within driving change in the built environment, whether that's how they approach design, but also whether they try to affect policy, and the list goes on. So that's where I see our mentorship role, to show the students that, design, built environment is very powerful, and it could be used as a tool for change.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was actually just thinking about you, Dr. Stewart, because I remember an op-ed piece that you wrote for Diverse about how it's important, if we're thinking about creating these inclusive spaces, that we make sure that they're designed for people to be able to feel comfortable in those spaces as well. So maybe there's an article between the two of you.
I'm down for a collab.
Cool.
Definitely.
All right, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, I love everything everyone has said. And, I'll say when I was in college, the thing I hated the most was you write a research paper, you get a grade, and that thing, you might as well throw it in the garbage. No one else is going to read it, right? And so what I try and do is make sure that, students are included in the research I'm doing, that I kind of highlight that, I might have some specialized skills because I've been in school longer, but they can do research, they can question, conventional wisdom, and they should, right? And they should really think through hierarchies of power and bias, and telling them, like, if you think I'm wrong, tell me, right? I'm wrong all the time, and if you give me evidence I'm wrong, I'll update my beliefs, and I will change what I think. That's what academia and science is supposed to do. And so I think really empowering students to know that they can do this research too, even if they don't have a piece of paper that says, they're a doctor or they have a master's, that there's no reason they shouldn't be engaging in, the global struggles for justice that we're all doing. And also, really trying to highlight and push them to think about what their own biases are and their own fears, right? So I share all of the stories of, the first time I presented at a conference and I had 40 slides all filled with text and 10 minutes to talk, and I was done in 7 minutes. And it was the worst presentation in the world, right? And I kind of say, like, I'm going to try and give you some tips so you don't do what I did. That this is a skill you can build, right? I'm going to tell you stories of where I thought something and I really believed it and I changed my mind. And that's how you should approach academia. And so to me, mentorship is really passing on the lessons that we've learned, not just about knowledge, but about how academia works and all of the problems with it and all of the ways it could be better. Really trying to foster the next generation to pick up where we left off and, finish the battles we don't win.
Yeah, great. Dr. Trevino and then Dr. Mays.
I agree with so much that people have said, and so much resonated with me also being like an immigrant who's like, my mom went to college and dad in Mexico, but not knowing anything about the US, like Dr. Mendoza said. And I really appreciate what Dr. Mark said. Like, I share so much of myself and my mistakes with students, which students are not normally used to seeing. We as professors are supposed to be perfect, but I think showing them all the ways in which I've learned how to navigate this as a first-gen low-income student and now getting here, I think it's very valuable. But one of the areas which was not your question, Dr. Watson, about mentoring, I think that sometimes mentoring for faculty is very overlooked. Like, if we get to this point where you make it, you have a PhD, you're here, you know a lot of things. We do know a lot of things, but even 5 years post PhD, I sometimes still feel like that first gen kid who doesn't know what she's doing, because I don't. And I'm still learning how to navigate this space that there's so much hidden curriculum that I don't know yet after all these years. So I think that sometimes mentoring for faculty, especially for faculty who are people like me and, people who don't know what they're doing, they're still learning how to navigate this. It's something that is really lacking. So for me, like, I think co-mentoring has been really key for me. We made a joke. I'm part of Latinx Geography's a specialty group. I was on the board, and we made a joke one time how we mentor each other because there's no one else. And we're literally getting mentoring from people who are 1 or 2 years ahead of us on the tenure track, or people who are just finishing like 1 year below us. Like, we're mentoring people. Like, the mentors that I have are not people who are like seasoned, people in academia. They're people that they just got by 1 year ago on something that I'm facing today. So I do want to highlight how sometimes mentoring for faculty is, like, again, it's really overlooked, and it's something that we really need, but we need a specific type of mentoring. We don't need the traditional mentoring. So for me, like, being super aware of this, I was able to create a mentoring program within the New England Faculty of Color Working Group for faculty of color in New England, in predominantly white institutions in this area of the country that is so culturally similar, where a lot of us are facing similar things. And I can just say that, like, I think that is one area that it's really important that we also think about. We do mentor our students, but we also, it's like, who's mentoring me? Who's your mentor? I think that that's something that a lot of us have had to get really creative to find those spaces. And it shouldn't be like that. Like, those should be also they should be part of the structure of academia. Like, we should not have to struggle or create entire programs just so that we find what we need, So just putting that out there as well.
No, thank you so much. Dr. Mays.
Just to add to what folks have already shared, it definitely is a parallel process. So I appreciate you talking about that, Dr. Trevino. I want to just mention the components for mentoring for me, both for what I need for myself, what I try to give and create for students, and also create for other, I'll say, junior faculty members because I'm tenured. But I really try to center on this idea of home place. So Bell Hooks talks about home place in a way that to me is a joyful resistance, right? So we are all beautifully and wonderfully made in spaces that probably weren't meant for us, right? Academia, whether you're a student or a faculty member in any way, shape, or form, a staff member, it can be a traumatizing place, but we need those spaces, both physically, emotionally, and mentally, that let us rest. And so my job as a faculty member is to let students rest. You are safe with me. I hear you. I see you. I affirm you. That thing that happened, you're right, it did happen. But guess what? It is not your story, and it is not the end of your story. I really invite students to engage in the healing that comes a part of home place, the growth that comes a part of home place, but also for me, home place is incomplete unless it has this thing called a radical imagination, and that we can envision something beyond what is happening now. So we're engaging in what Robin D.G. Kelly calls freedom dreaming. So I'm working again with people in education. What you see happening in K through 12 schools now, it doesn't have to be. What do we want it to be, and how can we work towards that? What we see happening in academia with my doc students, well, this is what is, but it's not what has to be. What do you want it to be? Here are the things that I want it to be and what I am working on and pushing towards in our program, in our college, in our university. What do you want to push towards? Because I'm not going to be an academic forever. I will pass the torch to you, and you will get closer to liberation than I ever will, because you're carrying the torch. And so inviting, I think, and encouraging students and being a part of those conversations, not only of what is, but what could be, is so important. I don't want us to get caught and stuck in the current moment. I think you had talked about this, Dr. Burmicky, that it's really hard to be doing the work that we're doing right now. Politically, it's awful. If you're in a state that has made legislation, increased surveillance of the kind of work that you want to do, that's what is. But I don't want to be trapped in what is. We can talk about how to navigate it, but I also want to work towards what could be, because this is not the future that I want for myself, for students, for people who aren't even here yet. And so we have to, I think, again, keep our eyes towards the North Star and keep moving in that direction and pushing ourselves. And that has to be a part of mentorship.
Yeah. Dr. Aglor?
Well, when thinking about mentorship, and I always think about meeting students where they are and acknowledging where they are in their lives, acknowledging the existence that they live, and that every form of knowledge they do is valid. I teach undergrads online. I teach PhD students in person, but I teach undergrads online. And we have Uber and Starbucks scholarship students, and that means they have to work a certain amount of hours or drive a certain amount of hours to keep their scholarships. I also teach people that in-person classes are hard because of accessibility issues, and military spouses who move around a lot. And I think about these online students and like just how driven they are, because they're not there killing time, like just trying to figure out what to do with their lives. They are in classes and they're there to get a degree that betters their lives. So like I love teaching online. I love online students. And so when I think about how to better serve them, like as a teacher, as a mentor, one of the things that I learned was that online students they multitask while they're listening to my lectures. So I stopped doing face on screen video lectures, and I started making essentially like all audio, like podcast style lectures. And they love it. And they tell me that, you know, I listen to your lectures while I'm driving, while I'm washing dishes, while I'm cooking dinner. And those are the sorts of things that really inspire me to keep pushing to make sure I'm serving students well. And one of the things that I'm thinking about now is how can I get those undergrad students into my research lab remotely? I mean, I haven't quite figured out how to do this, but that's the next step, is that I want online students to be able to have that same beautiful experience of like of undergrad research. And so how do we do that now?
Yeah. So one of the questions that came in earlier was asking how are you all remaining hopeful given the kind of attacks on DEI and the political situations that have sprouted up? How are you remaining hopeful and continuing to do the work that you do, which all has some degree of or piece of equity in much of your research? Anybody?
Yeah, I would just say this is not something that is new to us. it's almost like we have been training for this moment for a long time. And I think that the work, as long as you're pursuing work that you know to be just, to be equitable for the students and people, for our communities, I think that if you're doing work that you truly believe in as your mission, not just professional mission, because I don't think that we do these things because it's our work. For us, this is our livelihood, our communities, our friends, our parents, you know, tias, tios, like you name it. Like there's just a lot of people that drive this work. And I think that when you just know that you're on the right side of history, you feel hopeful because we've been here before. It's just packaged differently. And I think that at least I can speak for myself. I believe that I have trained for this moment. I believe that I have a community that have prepared me for this. And again, I think that that's what's special about this community and this recognition is that I feel more empowered than yesterday, because now it's seen and it's something that we knew deep inside that we believe in, but now it's being recognized, and you have a little bit of backing from diverse and other communities that care about the communities that we serve. So I'm hopeful because we know that we're on the right side of history. I think if there's anything that kind of, I see a lot of patterns about doing justice driven work, and I think that that flame never stops. It never goes away. And again, it's not just work, it's also personal. And I think that when you deeply, deeply care about these things, you're not going to give up on yourself. You're not going to give up on your family. You're not going to give up on your neighborhood. You're going to do it because this work represents more than just yourself.
Yeah. Professor Alexander?
One of the things that is both devastating and infuriating, but also provides me a sense of hope is the fact that these attacks are happening. One of the most poetic critical race theories out there is Kimberly Crenshaw's ideas of race reform and retrenchment. And it's this understanding that with every reform comes a series of backlashes, and it asks us to critique this traditional civil rights narrative as an upward trajectory, and maybe instead the experiences that we have in this country for advancement of civil rights, of justice, of diversity, of equity, of critical race theory is more of ebbs and flows and hills and valleys. And while we most certainly are in a valley right now, what makes me hopeful is the idea that a peak of progress is always on the horizon. And so that's the thing that keeps me hopeful. It's about being in community with the folks who pour into my cup. It's about knowing that scholars like the emerging scholars here that I'm honored to be alongside are doing the work that needs to be done, because that's going to get us where we need to be, up out of this valley and onto the peak of progress.
Well said, Dr. Leyva.
I agree. I think a lot about this work being also done in solidarity and in community. So kind of the going back to the piece about mentorship about the lab is like, it's also a mentoring piece about how to do this work in community too. Because oftentimes the academy tells us that individualism is the thread, right? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when scholars get attacked, they get attacked as individuals, but that affects those who are around us as well, right? So like, it's not just one individual scholar being attacked for engaging in work of justice. It's that you're implicating students with that, you're implicating your colleagues in certain ways. And so I bring this up because as a person who's been attacked multiple times, I've gotten to the point of hope about if I'm not, I might not be doing the right work if I'm not making some people mad. So I think part of that is that, I mean, and part of it is like that kernel kind of keeps me going, right? Where it's like, if you're going to try to speak truth to power, you're probably going to be upsetting somebody. But we also have to self-preserve in this work. So part of this too is about being prepared. So like, because I've been through it multiple times, reaching out to contacts at the university for media relations, academic leaders, reaching out to folks who are also coming under attack. Because sometimes when this happens, people are feeling vulnerable and may not want to share that they're going through it. And so I've actually been quite active of being able to say, here are the resources, here are the steps that I've taken up, because part of being hopeful is also part of being prepared. And so what are the ways that we can show up for one another when we're all collectively doing the work of justice?
Yeah, no, great. Dr. Stewart?
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly, I think, the other thing is that, for me, it fuels my rage. And I think about Brittany Cooper's book, Eloquent Rage, because I think that there's a place for that too, to be angry at what's happening in the world and politically, to be angry what's happening on a global stage. And we see the genocide happening overseas. And so I think that also has its use. And so that is what helps fuel me in maintaining that hope, is also sort of the anger and the rage, because we know that justice matters. And I think about, people often like to quote Martin Luther King out of context, but I think about when we've seen these uprisings in various different places, and people always want to condemn certain types of resistant violence. He said that violence is often the language of the unheard. And it's certainly not something that I'm calling or asking for, but I think we need to acknowledge that. And so for me, when I think about the ways in which I am frustrated at the state of this country and the world, that is what helps drive me. Thinking about the stakes for those that have them much higher than I do, and so that also connects to how I'm able to remain hopeful and energized in doing the work. Of course, I get to take breaks, right, and I take a step back and I tap out like everyone else, but I think that it's important to just acknowledge that that also is a part of, I think, how we continue onward.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about having this platform is to be able to promote the work that you all are doing, which I think is so important and significant. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about some of the projects and work that you're up to. One of the things that drives me crazy sometimes is when I watch TV and I see people who are so-called experts on topics on TV and they don't know what they're talking about. And so I'm just always saying, well, why didn't they call me? I would have recommended somebody to them to be on TV talking about something who actually is qualified and actually has done the work and the research. So it just drives me crazy a little bit sometimes when I watch cable TV and these other outlets. So maybe you can talk a little bit about projects that you're working on or things that you're up to that maybe our audience can stay tuned. Folks are certainly interested in following you all on social media and keeping track with your scholarship. Anybody want to share some of what you might be up to? Don't be shy here.
I can jump in. I guess I'll share two things I'm working on. One, I just completed a research project called Tourism, Tropicalization, and the Architectural Image. It looks at the history of tourism imagery back from 18th century all the way to mass tourism, and understands issues of tourism consumption, colonial consumption, and architecture's role within how the Caribbean has been framed. And so that is going to be on an exhibition that I'm putting together in the fall at the Octagon Museum here in DC. So if anyone's in the area, can check that out. And then also currently working on post-disaster housing solutions, looking at climate change, displacement, and how do we as architects begin to design for the fact that displacement is occurring, will need to occur, and once again, looking at social, economic, political, public health, mental health issues that are wrapped up in climate change related displacement. So it's research, but also embedded in our design studio. Yeah, so that's what we're working on.
That's great. Terrific work. Professor Alexander?
My work is predominantly on tracking, substantively analyzing, and doing visioning around the anti-CRT measures that have been introduced across the country. And so as of a week ago, we're up to 783 different measures that aim to restrict access to truthful information about race, systemic racism, and uses critical race theory as a tool to reject those teachings, trainings, and all the things. And so what we're doing here now is creating a model measure. So a model legislation or a school board policy or something that could be easily edited to fit the authoritative body that talks about what the true tenets and teachings of critical race theory is, and also provides specific steps that teachers can use in order to teach the information they want to teach so that students have access to the tools they need to address some of the pressing racial and social justice issues of our time.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Mark, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'll share two projects that I'm working on. One is the Global Rights Project that we're working on here at URI. I work on a data set measuring government respect for human rights in every country around the world. And this project, we put out a report in December for a general audience to kind of translate some of what we know in academia about human rights and what human rights around the world look like, which ones are most violated. We give every country sort of a ranking, 0 to 100, we give them a grade. The US gets a D. And so, the report is accessible, anyone can look at it. And really, this is part of some of my work trying to translate academic research for a general audience, and particularly research that uses data, which is often, people think it's completely inaccessible. I'm trying to break down where it's trustworthy and where it's not. And the second project, every summer, the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies puts on an international Nonviolence Institute, and we teach Kingian nonviolence, Kingian principles for organizing for social justice, right? What are the tools you can use? What are the tactics? What are sort of the counter tactics that the state might use against you to try and crush you, right? And what can we do to kind of successfully push for social justice and change? And we're working right now to really try and incorporate some of international human rights law and activism into this framework to think about that is one framework for thinking about social justice and pushing for causes, and really looking beyond just the US to say, here's what's possible. It's happening in a ton of other countries. Why can't we do it here?
No. And that first report, people can access it through a website, or will that be available?
Yeah, so right now, if people go to URI and just search the Global Rights Project, there's a page with the report. You can download it. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll definitely encourage people to take a look at that. Dr. Berminke.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the main research sites that I do relates to presidential leadership in higher education. I was actually able to comment on this in one of Diverse's articles as it relates to the very unfortunate incident that happened to Dr. Claudine Gay at Harvard. And right now I'm in a project that looks at a very, very large survey with presidents from all kinds of sectors in higher education. There's a survey and there's a focus group part of the research that will be more or less summarized in May that we're hoping to release very soon. But what relates to the current conditions that we're living in right now is that what I hear often and often is how exhausted presidents are and how impossible the role has become, which is not news to anybody, but the ways in which has become the pressures that are coming not only from the institutions but also externally, like states, judicial hearings, not judicial, but like congressional hearings and all kinds of things, is really making the job impossible, especially to aspiring leaders who hold multiple marginalized identities. So I worry that the academy for so long has failed to hire leaders that are representative of the students that we serve, and with all of these incidents, that's one area that I don't feel as hopeful. Let me tell you that. And I think that the more I do research about this, the more what support, institutions say that they want diverse leaders, right? But are they ready to have leaders with the agendas that we have? And when they're not, are they gonna do what we witnessed a month ago particularly with Dr. Gay? And I think that there's a lot of people that are second guessing their career trajectories in the presidency. And from what I'm gathering from the data, the level of exhaustion is something that really, really just stood out that I'm hoping to report both through survey and focus group data. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Aglora, and then Dr. Trevina.
So I'm the futurist for the Latinx Pacific Archive, and co-director and historian Rudy Guevara published Aloha Compadre, a book last year about Latinx migration to Hawaii. And I love him dearly, but he and I both know that his participants and most people are not going to read that loving 400-page historical book. So I've been working with Latinx migrants in Hawaii to co-design a video game based on his book about Latino migration to Hawaii, long-term historical to the present, based in historical archives and artifacts and family stories. Stay tuned.
That's great. Looking forward to that one for sure. Dr. Trevino.
Yeah, I just want to, the question about like, how do we like hope, like, how do we do this? I think, there's been a lot going on. Some people have already talked about this. Like, there's very open attacks on this work. We see it like legislators. We see it with like these states where people are leaving because of they can't even call the work that they're doing diversity or whatever. I do also want to say that sometimes this is also not like openly, visibly attacks on us. It can be really insidious and really hidden and really hard to point out sometimes even, and it happens in our universities and our colleges and our departments. So I think for me, one of the ways that I think I've used as a tool to navigate a lot of this is having community and having people that can sustain me through that. Because I do think that in these like private spaces in our homes, when we're just like, just building relationships with our friends and colleagues, like I think that that's one space where we can also battle this. And I think just having a community of people that can sustain you and support you is really, really key, because yes, there's these big open attacks, but sometimes they happen in smaller scales. And I just think the only way to really get through it is by having a really strong support network. It doesn't have to be dozens of people, but you do need to have a few key people that can help you when you really need it. Dr. Burmicky talked about the level of exhaustion that people face. I think that a way to overcome that is by having people that can, who said it earlier was Dr. Mays, having those spaces that she creates for students. Also, we need to create it for one another, because I think the only way to get through this is if we do have those spaces where we can just let our guard down and have our friends hold us up.
I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of the latest issue of Diverse Issues, where you can read all of the profiles. But more importantly, I want you all to stay in touch and to find ways where we can collaborate together as we work to put equity issues at the center of all that we do. So thank you again. Next month, Diverse celebrates its 40th anniversary. So certainly opportunities for us to continue these discussions. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, scholars, and congratulations.